And that area will change once he departs.
Yeah.
They probably will bring somebody.
Good afternoon. I'm here with my guest, Sergio Inestrosa. And Sergio, welcome to here on Poet to Poet.
Thank you so much.
Sergio received his PhD in literature from the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico in 1998. Sergio was a Jesuit student for 8 years in Central America, living in El Salvador, Panama, and Nicaragua. While in El Salvador, he studied with Ignacio Ellacuria,
yes.
a well-known Jesuit scholar, was killed in 1998 by military. He received a master's degree in communications, became a professor and researcher in the communication field. He has presented many research papers, published 6 books in Mexico. He taught Spanish at the Estrella Mountain College in Avondale, Arizona. In 2000, he conducted postdoctoral research at Harvard, focusing on the works of Octavio Paz. And he's a colleague of mine at Endicott College, and he's been teaching Spanish and Mexican culture there, a Spanish Cinema Club. He's also developed the Spanish minor and designed many new courses, including Spanish for professionals, Spanish cinema, Spanish translation, Spanish composition, and he loves to read and write. And his latest book of his recent collection of poetry is Los Bordes del Placer.
Yeah, this one.
And another one just came out.
Yep.
Which is?
El fuego en tus palabras.
Which means?
Like the fire in your words.
Okay. So you were a Jesuit, and that's a scholarly order.
Yes,
it is. And
it is.
What took you away from the religious order to more academic order?
Well, they are very academic.
Okay, they are.
They are.
You went into the academy.
Yes. It's kind of a natural process for the guys that exit the Jesuit.
Why did you exit, though?
My wife.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. You didn't want to be celibate, right?
Well, once I saw my wife, I says, this is not for me.
Okay.
The academic part is still for me, but the celibacy, not so much.
Yeah.
So that's basically the main reason. And probably why I put the eyes on my wife, maybe they were a personal crisis at that time, 1982, 83. And so I decided to exit the Jesuit. But it's very common for scholars that exit the Jesuit to go back into something that the Jesuit has, like we call it obra en español, that can be a university or a human rights center, or a pastoral center, or a magazine. Those kind of things are very common for guys that exit the priesthood.
Okay.
So I exit that, and the first job that I get as a lay person was working in human rights. I started in Mexico City, and I moved to Washington, D.C., to the Georgetown University Human Rights, and then to L.A., into the Oscar Romero House, the Romero House in downtown LA. And then I decided to go back to Mexico to continue my education, because it was good to work for human rights, but the salary was hardly survivable.
So you got a master's in communication, and how did that sort of fit in with your studies of the Nobel Prize-winning author, Octavio Paz? I mean, he wrote the Labyrinth of Solitude, which was dealt with very Mexican culture. I know his poetry was dealt with a lot of Mexican culture. So maybe you could just tie into things.
Yeah, I get into the communication by pure casualty. When I returned to Mexico City from LA, I was there were a quite kind of a well-known writer in Mexico, and he was the dean of that faculty, of that department. And I went to see him as a former Jesuit to ask him to write a recommendation letter for me to enter into the literature program. So he told me, what are you looking for in the literature program? And I say, I would like to write. I would like to become a writer. He says, well, then your department is not the literature department. Your department is the communication department, because we write here. They do not write over there. They do kind of like an academic research. They do critics. But if you would like to be a creative writer, communication will do better for you than the literature department. And he says, because he has very friends that I know in the Jesuit community, he says, what I can do for you, we can admit you in the program, and you can start your own personal background. You can start writing in the way that you wanna do your own program. So he convinced me to stay in that program. So I started that program with the intention to start writing. And I met my mentor, a former Harvard grad doctor, and he was guiding me through the communication department, and he gives me this kind of like inclination for research. So I start working with him, I start working in the research area. So I become more than a writer, I become more a researcher in the communication field. But when I was doing the master research, I discovered the Labyrinth of Solitude, and I started reading Octavio Paz, and one of the chapters of that book, or one of the parts of that book, was focused on the religious parties, the St. Patron parties. And I was living in a town, my own town, and it was a big celebration. So I used the celebration in the town to create my master dissertation, using Octavio Paz as a background. So I went to Octavio Paz through the community's celebration, that religious celebration. And then when I finished the master degree, the literature thing still was in my mind, so I went and applied for the literature doctoral program now as a scholar of the university. So it was easy to transition from communication to the literature program.
Good. Now, you also are a lover of Spanish cinema, and we were discussing cinema during the Franco regime, and you said it was basically nil. But pre-Franco, you were saying?
Well, there is a famous movie. I'm not an expert in the Spaniard cinema. I am more, if an expert is the right expression, I know more the Latin American cinema, particularly the Argentinian one and the Mexican one. But there is a very famous movie from Spain that reflects on the pre-Franco experience in Spain, and that movie in Spanish is El lenguaje de las mariposas, or La lengua de las mariposas. It's a very beautiful, very tender movie about that old teacher in a very small community, and he taught those kids to be free and to love freedom more than anything else, and to embrace their own identity, blah, blah, blah. And when the thing was collapsing in Spain, the military took control of that town, and he was captured because he was a rojo guy, like a communist guy. And so he was put in a truck with all other guys that were accused of being red or pro-communist. And the people of the town, they started screaming things to them and throwing a stone. And one of his students, a very young guy, he started calling him the same words in Latin that he teach to him when he was his student. So he was, the little boy was not incriminating him because he was screaming the Latin words that he teach him. So he was kind of like making a bridge in between him that has been captured and the kid that has been being free in that town, right? Like saying goodbye to that guy because he won't see the light anymore.
Now, in the 20th century, what would you think of this? Can you name some of you think it's classic Latin American cinema?
Latin American cinema, well, we have in Mexico.
You talked about City of God. That was
that's in the 80s movie, Brazilian movie, very famous movie, very violent movie that reflects crime and drugs trafficking and gang members in Rio de Janeiro, right? But La Historia Oficial, the official story in Argentina that reflect the time when the military junta took control of Argentina.
We discussed The Kiss of the Spider-Man.
Also from an Argentinian writer, right? You have in Chile, you have...
there was a movie about Oscar Romero.
Yeah, there was,
with,
yes.
Juan
Juan
Julia.
Yeah, from Puerto Rico. In Chile, you have the Machuca, that is very famous movie because they portray the years of the difficult years of Allende as president and all the turmoil before Pinochet took control. And that movie is very loving in Chile because the movie is portrayed through the eyes of the very young kids that are attending to a very elite school, a very rich guy and a very poor guy, in a real experiment that the priests of that school tried to do before the Allende coup d'etat. That's one movie. Then we have No in Chile that reflect how Allende lose the plebiscite in Chile and how the guys that do marketing help to create the spot to convince people to vote no for Allende so he can leave the presidency. And as those movies, we have a famous movie in Bolivia, Even the Rain, that is very interesting because portrayed the problem of water in Cochabamba. So the Latin American film is very engaged into some of the Latin American problems.
So do you think it's more socially attuned than American cinema?
It is way more because it's more into reflecting on the problems that we have. Like, for instance, new Mexican films, right, is very engaged into the problems of narco traffic and violence in the narco traffic, like El Infierno.
But they have drama too, isn't there? Drama.
There are many moves into, you saw the movie Nosotros los Nobles, right? It's very into the almost a soap opera kind of film. But there is this kind of other movies that reflect on the problems that the society is confronting right now, like Even the Rain, right? The problem of water. Meanwhile, those guys are filming a movie about the Latin American conquest, and there is a real problem of water in Cochabamba, and how the two problems intertwine into the movie. And the problem of water becomes even more important than the filming, than producing the film.
Now, I was going to ask you, I know you are also a big fan of soccer.
I love sports, in particular soccer.
Soccer is as big as a cultural influence. I know in Mexico as it is, baseball is in the United States.
Soccer is a religion in Latin America. If you talk with an Argentinian guy or a Brazilian guy,
well, baseball can be a religion too, right?
Probably is. Probably is. And in Mexico, as in the Caribbean, we are huge in baseball, even though we don't sound like huge in baseball. Mexico has a league.
I was reading in Cuba, the new generation doesn't want baseball, they want soccer.
But they are not that good. They are very good in baseball.
Soccer is a lot cheaper to play. Baseball,
probably,
you need all that stuff.
Baseball you need the bat and the balls are more expensive, those kind of things, right? But that reflects in the Caribbean. I mean, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico are very huge in baseball, and the Caribbean coastline of Venezuela is huge in baseball. Panama is huge in baseball. A little bit in Nicaragua.
More so, is baseball more of a religion than soccer?
No, I won't say that. I will say soccer is a religion.
And when you say soccer is a religion, what do you mean religion?
It's a passion, right? People go to the games and
people have killed over it.
Yes, of course. You most likely friends. If you have any friends in Latin American countries, they won't advise you to go into a soccer game unless you go with them, because it can become very dangerous. Sometimes it's very violent in confrontation between two groups that support the two different teams that are playing. That's Barras Bravas in Argentina.
That's not accepted, though.
It's not accepted, but it happens because people get into the passion of football, right? So
is it an escape, you think, from that is so passionate?
I don't know if it's an escape or it's just the way that we embrace the competition and those kind of things. But in places like Brazil and Argentina, and Uruguay, to name probably the most rivalry there in South America, is they can talk about anything, but when there is a soccer game,
you say it's religion, and God knows religion kills.
Yeah, well, that's true. It can go both ways, right? So
there's a lot of talk now of immigration and walls being built, and by our friend Trump and others. How as a Mexican do you feel this spell of xenophobia will play out?
I guess my first reaction will be try to be calm and see, well, this is an electoral year, and politicians says whatever they need to say in order to bring people into their own side and win the elections, right? That I would like to think that at the end of the day will be a civil process, and that all the things that we are saying are not true. But I have to admit at the same time that with Trump, who knows? Because I don't know if we know him or we understand him completely. With the other politicians, we can understand that, well, what they are saying maybe is only in order to get votes so they can be elected. Right? With Trump, I'm not that sure. How dangerous can be? It can be very dangerous, right? The idea of building the wall with Mexico, that is not a good idea. I don't think, right? Isolated from other cultures is not a good idea. Criminalizing that culture is not a good idea. Not everybody is a rapist in Mexico. Not all the Mexicans that are here in the state are rapists. There are some great people, like great scholars, great workers, great gardeners, great, you name it, right? Most likely he's using Mexican as a generic expression for all the Latinos. It's not only the guys that has been born in Mexico.
I think it's probably an expression for everything that's coming into Islam, Islamic people.
Yeah, but that's the
way it is.
But I'm not sure if he is using that information just to gain guys that are against immigration or afraid of immigrants or tired of immigration in this country, and lack of laws about immigration and certainties about immigration in these countries, right?
Now, I want to get a little into your poetry. Politics always rears its ugly head, doesn't it? But now, obviously, you were influenced by Paz. Maybe Neruda.
Neruda is
an influence on you. Lorca.
Yeah. I have read Lorca, but I would say not much.
Yeah.
I'm more like a Latin American guy. Carlos Fuentes is a great guy that I read a lot, and I use him a lot in my history classes. Yes, he's a very good, very clever, organized thinker about the history of Latin America. He had a very open perspective of Latin America. So I am more influenced from Latin American authors rather than Spanish.
Do you think that Latin American literature gets enough play in this country, or do you think it's sort of not played down?
I don't think that in the state we recognize or we read enough Latin American literature. I guess we have major writers and that we don't know, we don't read here.
How is it accepted by Latin American literature in the academic world now?
In Latin America, it's very well accepted.
I know that, but in the United States.
In the United States,
Estado Unidos.
Well, in some big universities like Princeton, right? Yeah. Where, for instance, Mario Vargas Llosa teach during and Princeton had Ricardo Piglia as one of the faculties in the department. In those big universities, most likely they are reading the Latin American big names, right? But in other colleges, small colleges, where the faculties has probably more familiarity with Spain, they probably are not reading enough from Peru, from Mexico, from Chile, from Argentina, because there is a lot of writers that are not, they do not make it yet into the U.S. market, right? They are translating is a problem, right? Most of those writers are writing in Spanish. So once the book is translated, getting to the market in the United States, it's probably 5 years later. So you need to have a large recognition like Neruda. Neruda is very well read in the U.S., right? Paz is well read in the U.S. in top circles. Fuentes as well, and obviously Mario Vargas Llosa and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, right? But Roncagliolo, that is a new generation of writers from Peru, for instance. How many people read Roncagliolo in the U.S.? I would say very few.
Yeah, you seem to see more from India and things like that get more play.
Probably. And I guess...
how about the Panamanian won the Pulitzer Prize? He teaches at MIT. I forget his name. Not Panamanian. He's from Dominican Republic, or?
Yeah, I have seen his name in the media. Probably he has more chances because he's from the Dominican Republic and he is more into the U.S. culture also, right? Kind of like a dual citizenship. He may have more chances to be in red than other Latinos, Latin American guys that lives in Latin America and write from Latin America, or they live in Spain and they write just from the Spanish perspective, right? Because all those authors, they need the translation part. And until you find the translation link and to make it into the U.S. market, it may take a little bit of time.
Okay, so you have two new. I want you to give it a chance. You're going to read and try to. You're not much of a translator, are you?
I am not a translator
but you'll
at
try
all.
To you're going to read in Spanish and try to translate.
I can do my best.
For a Spanish audience.
I can
read some
do
of
that.
Your poems.
Sure.
By the way, these are available on Amazon.
They are both in Amazon. The Bordes del Placer is also in the Kindle edition. The other one just came out, El Fuego en Tus Palabras, and that's not in Kindle edition as far as I know, but it's in the paper edition. I just opened one and it says...
And why does it? Yeah. Why is it a romance language, so to speak?
Why is well, there are 4 or 5 Romance languages, right? French, Italian, Portuguese.
What's the quality of a Romance?
Well, it's coming from Bulgar Latin.
Yeah.
They have all in common the same type of grammar thing, right? It's not that they are romantic per se. It's Romance because it came from the Bulgar Latin and Rome controlling. That was the basic language of the empire, right? They share many things. The grammar is one of the things that they share. We also share a lot of vocab that is very similar in the 4 languages, right? Being Spanish, I guess, the easier of those 4 languages, right? The easy to understand, is very phonetical. It's not 100% phonetical, but it's very, very phonetical. That makes things easier to learn. Right?
Okay. So let us, before the time runs out, I want you to read some of your...
I would read Tu Primer Beso. That's
means?
pretty much your first kiss.
Okay.
Right? Tu primer beso. Lo recuerdo con perfecta nitidez. Era viernes, el día de ese beso casi robado, salvo que tú también querías que pasara bajo el amparo de la celestina oscuridad de un cine club. Mi mano se aproximó tímida a tu mano, tentando al destino. Después me abismé en ti y en aquel movimiento audaz que nos arrastró en este torbellino que es la vida juntos.
So, translate best.
Yeah, your first kiss, I remember that very clear. It was a Friday. It was almost like a stolen kiss, salvo the, even though you also want to be kissed. It was in the darkness of a cine club. My hand was close to your hands in a timid way, like hesitant way, like tempting the destiny, like trying and see how the destiny will play for me. After that, I came into an abysm in that movement that moved us away from move us away into the life that we have been spending together. That's the idea, right? That's not the translation verse by verse, but that's the idea.
You plan to get any of these translated?
At some point, I had like 3 or 4 poems that already have been translated, but going back to the conversation with the Latino writers, right? The translation part is a difficult part, and it's the missing link.
Actually, Professor Dan Sklar's son translated some of your poems.
Yes, he translated 3 or 4 of me.
They were pretty good.
No. And that's the missing link, because one thing is that you write your own experience or your creation, and it's a different thing to translate the thing.
So that the old cliche lost in translation.
Exactly. It's more than how much you control the language. It's more than that, right? Is when you translate, Paz used to say that, when you translate, you recreate that translation into the culture that is reading the translation, right? Mm-hmm. So as a translator, if I were into the business of translating my own thing, it's different, right? That is when somebody from this culture translate and approach that poem or any other piece of art, right? That person is bringing that experience as he read it or she read it, and translate it into the community that he belongs to, right? So it's almost like a recreation. It's like an artistic thing, translating from one language to another, because you are not translating words, you are translating the experience that you had when you were reading that particular in this case, poems, right? And I guess that's a disadvantage for us Latinos, unless you do your own translation. Otherwise, it will take. There is a long period of time probably between your creation in paper and the translation in paper one more time. It may take 3-5 years. Because the market is slow in that process. The market doesn't go in the same pace, right?
Okay, why don't you read one more selection?
Let's get from the other book, El Fuego en tus palabras, and tú y yo, you and I. Antes de conocernos, mucho antes de que el primer amanecer nos deslumbrara con su luz y diluyera las sombras del caos primigenio, antes incluso que los ojos deslumbrados de Dios admiraran los vivos colores que la luz del día iba pintando a su paso, mucho antes que la palabra nombrara cada una de las cosas que se iban haciendo realidad, antes incluso que tu cuerpo se volviera un poema de amor entre mis sábanas, tú y yo ya éramos la expresión viva del amor. This is a double idea. It's the idea of the Genesis, at the very beginning, how God was creating things, right? Just by words, but naming those things, right? And it's a very dear idea in Latin America. Paz loves this idea, that the word has the power of creation. So when you name something, you create that something, right? And the second